flowing like a river, justice rising up like mountains. People round the world, come join your hands. Peace is flowing like a river, justice rising up like mountains. Share and walk the golden road across the land. Peace is flowing like a river, justice rising up like mountains. People round the world, come join your hands. Peace is flowing like a river, justice rising up like mountains. Share and walk the golden road across the land.
Hello, I'm Dennis Ward of the House of McFadden, and I'd like to invite you to this constitutional discussion series for purposes of giving you an education as to the history and the background of how we came to be the country known as the United States of America. In this series, we're going to be looking at all of the founding documents and the historical aspects of those, along with many other books that were written by people with the benefit of hindsight, so to speak. And we'll be discussing specific aspects leading up to the Constitution. Thank you for watching. Well, hello everyone. I'm back. This is the second of our series discussing the Constitution. Today we're going to be talking about the most important document in this whole series. This is sort of the plans for the entire structure that was built over a period of a couple of decades between 1775 and 1791. And we're going to be talking about the Declaration of Independence, and actually I'm going to be reading some very key points from the Declaration, which was written pretty much by Thomas Jefferson, although he did have some help in editing it. But this is a key document. This is the plan which led to the Articles of Confederation in 1777, eventually to the Constitutional Convention beginning in 1785, and then finally at the Bill of Rights in 1791. In Congress, July the 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. That's an amazing paragraph. He doesn't talk about the common law of England. He talks about the laws of nature and nature's God. He makes a clear distinction that this is not something that is going to be subject to the common law tyranny which the colonists had been living under for decades under the King of England. And we go on. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The consent. We have to consent to whatever it is that they intend to do. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light or transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient suffering of these colonies, and as such is now a necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of absolute tyranny over the states. To prove this, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. And here Thomas Jefferson lays out the facts. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless these people would relinquish the right of representation in legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual and uncomfortable and distant from the depository of the public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. Now let me ask you a question. Does this sound somewhat familiar today? He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such delusions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions from within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing to assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. Does that sound a little familiar? Do you think maybe that might be addressed in the future in the Constitution? I think so. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. That resonates with the Third Amendment of the Bill of Rights, I do believe. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and acknowledged and unacknowledged by our laws, giving assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for inducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the form of our government, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, dissolution, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. Let that sink in, folks. This is what we faced in the 1770s. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioner of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus remarked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of the consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, Do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states that we have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish currents, and do all the other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. There you have it, laid out in simple, plain English. The Declaration was signed by 56 delegates from the Congress from Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Massachusetts, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire. This is the defining document. This is the plan for the future of America. Now, if you're interested, there's some additional research that was done way back when, called What Happened to the 56 Men Who Signed the Declaration of Independence. In the wake of the 4th of July holiday, I stumbled upon an interesting study about the fate of the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. I've often wondered what the lives of our country's founding fathers were like. Many times, those original 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence have been elevated to a hero status in this nation's collective minds. They accomplished the impossible and created the best nation on the planet. We owe a lot to these 56 men and what became of them. 5 of the signers were captured by the British as traitors and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes ransacked and burned. 2 lost their sons serving in the Revolutionary Army, and another had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 fought and died from wounds or hardship of the Revolutionary War. These men signed their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. So what kind of men were they? 24 were lawyers and jurists. 11 were merchants. 9 were farmers and large plantation owners, men of means, well educated. But they signed the Declaration of Independence knowing full well that the penalty would be death if they were captured. Carter Braxton of Virginia, a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ship swept from the seas by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts, and he died in rags. Thomas McKean was so hounded by the British, he was forced to move his family almost constantly. He served in the Congress without pay, and his family was kept in hiding. His possessions were taken from him, and poverty was his reward. Vandals or soldiers looted the properties of Dillery, Hall, Clymer, Walton, Gwinnett, Hayward, Rutledge, and Middleton. At the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. noted that the British general Cornwallis had taken over the Nelson home for his headquarters. He quietly urged General George Washington to open fire. The home was destroyed, and Nelson died bankrupt. Francis Lewis had his home and properties destroyed. The enemy jailed his wife, and she died within a few months. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside as she was dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His fields and his gristmill were laid to waste. For more than a year he lived in forests and caves, returning home to find his wife dead and his children vanished. Think about what these men pledged and what they did to bring about what we have today, and realize that we have a duty, an obligation, and a responsibility to carry forward to preserve this republic. Thank you.